The President and the Shah met for about an hour this morning. The President said the Shah's visit was encouraging and had strengthened the strong ties of friendship between the two countries.
Despite the temporary imposition of martial law, the Shah's new government appears determined to press ahead with liberal reform. It is from the mosques that opposition to the Shah is being led by puritanical Shiite Muslims. The religious zealots want to return to the Constitution of 1906, which would ensure all legislation conforms with Islamic law.
Almost 40,000 refinery workers went on strike today, virtually cutting off Iran's petroleum exports.
University students demonstrating in Tehran, shouting death to the Shah, pledge allegiance to the Islamic movement of the Ayatollahs.
The number killed in Tehran since the beginning of the month is probably well over 100. But people in this crowd were saying and believing 7,000 had been killed. Emotions over the dead and the rumors of dead are high. Every day here now, the demonstrations and arrests go on. Rumors in Tehran say people are being armed and may soon start firing back at the troops. News there would be some kind of announcement about a new government came after yet another day of running confrontations in the center of Tehran. The army kept moving today, trying to head off the demonstrations, keep them where possible from growing in size. This dogged military resistance to the anti-Shah disturbances, part of an effort to buy the Shah as much time as possible in which to create a political solution. Demonstrations like these today in Tehran are a daily occurrence in towns throughout the country now, and one sign of the fact there is nothing less than a kind of revolution being attempted here, trying to change the form of Iran's government, and unlikely to settle easily for any solution which still keeps the Shah on his throne.
Daily, it has become more difficult to look at the scope of opposition to the Shah of Iran and still see his monarchy surviving. The Ayatollahs are committed to the ouster of the Shah and nothing less than that. They chant, Magba Shah, death to the Shah.
The new prime minister has gone some liberal political distance beyond the Shah, but not likely far enough to suit the anti-Shah religious establishment or members of the political opposition.
The Shah and his empress left shortly before midday. The empire he had hoped to build had been shattered by a year of violence.
The news spread with the speed of the human shout. Shah Farari Shodeh, the people cried, the Shah has escaped. The old chant of death to the Shah was replaced today by a new one, death to Carter. There is still a strong sentiment against American interests in Iran and the widespread belief that the United States has taken the profits from Iranian oil. Khomeini, Khomeini, they cried, we're waiting for you. The Ayatollah is expected to return to Iran, but when or how is not yet known.
Welcome back to the Unfiltered Political Lens Podcast. Today I want to discuss about Iran and the country itself, the factions within it, and the power struggles that are the fight from the inside to have control of the country. And just like the different, there's a previous Shah in 79 and the overthrow to the Republic, obviously, with Ali Khamenei being the supreme leader. And just how their inner workings are and how they operate within their own system and what their system truly means. And I also want to discuss the off branches, like the sects of people that are either part of the IRGC or working for them, and then those who oppose them. So I want to get right into it, so we're gonna do that now. So I want to thank you for tuning in, and I hope you guys enjoy. When I look around today, I don't see a country. I see a system engineered through revolution, ideology, and the decades of survival. And to truly understand it, I have to go back to 1979. When the U.S. backed the monarchy did collapse under the massive public unrest, and it was replaced with an Islamic Republic that fused the religion with the state power in a way that fundamentally reshaped the nation, bringing clerical authority into the center of the governance under the doctrine of Waliyat al-Faqih, or the guardianship of the Islamic jurists, which ultimately elevated the supreme leader into the most powerful position in the country. And today that role is formerly held by Ali Khamenei, because Trump ended up blowing him up. And it's supposedly held by his son, Mojtaba Khomeini, although currently we don't know his whereabouts, believed to be in Russia hospital. He was injured in the first wave of attacks, they are believing, and not really getting much information out of that side of the country. But he's a figure who doesn't just operate as a symbolic head, but as a final authority over the military, the judiciary, and the intelligence services. And a key policy decision, meaning that even though Iran presents itself with elected institutions like a president, and the decisions, meaning that even though Iran presents itself with elected institutions like a president and a parliament, the real power structure exists above and beyond those mechanisms. And beneath the top layer sits what I consider a true backbone of the system, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which was originally created to defend the revolution, but has since evolved into a multi-dimensional force that controls not only the elite military units, but also the vast economic assets, the infrastructure projects, intelligence networks, and the foreign operations, making it one of the most powerful hybrid institutions in the world. And when I examine its reach, I see an organization deeply embedded in nearly every aspect of Iranians' lives, from construction and oil to the telecommunications and the banking, and this gives it both financial independence and political leverage. And alongside of it operates the Bajaj, the BASIJ, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that, which is a volunteer-based but highly mobilized parliamentary force that acts as the regime's internal enforcement arm, like secret police, I'm assuming. Often deployed to suppress the protesters, monitor the public's behavior, and maintain the ideological control on the street level. And as I zoom out, I start to see that Iran isn't governed by a single unified authority, but by a layered and often competing network of factions, starting with the hardliners or the principalists, who align closely with the supreme leader in the IRGC, that are advocating for strict adherence to the revolutionary ideals, resistance to the West, influence and expansion of Iran's regional power. And these hardliners, they dominate the system, both shaping both domestic and foreign policy, while on the other side you see reformists who operate within the framework of the Islamic Republic, but it pushes for greater personal freedoms and political openness, and the engagement with the international community. Although their influence has been systemically reduced over time, those disqualifications, arrests, and political pressure and then there are the pragmatists who focus on less ideology and more on economic survival, trying to navigate the sanctions and the inflation that the country's got on them by our country, the U.S., as well as other countries, and the international isolation. They often find themselves squeezed out by the more ideologically driven factions and beyond the official political structure, which lies a fragmented opposition landscape that includes, the protest movements, economic hardship, and the social restrictions, as well as exiled groups. Now, the exile groups like the monarchists who support the figures such as Reza Pahlavi, which is a Shah from the 79th Sun, he's representing a return to the pre-revolutionary governance, although their influence inside of Iran remains limited and often disconnected from the realities on the ground. And when I analyzed it and how all these groups interact, it becomes clear that the core power base that reinforces itself through shared interests, loyalty structures, and control over resources, and then the opposition groups remain divided by the ideology, their geography, and their strategy, which significantly weakens the Islamic Republic, which has endured for over decades, for 4 decades to be exact, despite the reoccurring waves of unrest. And when I consider the more aggressive or so-called malicious elements within the system, I see that the IRGC, they're playing a central role not only in the internal control but also in projecting power externally through regional alliances and proxy networks, which further strengthens its position at home. Now, by framing itself as a defender of national security, and this creates a feedback loop where the external threats will justify internal control, and the internal control enables the external expansion, making the system both resilient and adaptive. And as I put all this together, what I ultimately see is not a fragile regime on the brink of collapse, but a deeply rooted structure designed to absorb the pressures and neutralize the opposition, and to maintain continuity even under extreme conditions, which makes the question of, the change far more complex than it's simply removing a single leader or holding an election, because any real transformation would require disrupting an entire ecosystem of power that has been carefully constructed over decades to prevent exactly what outcome. And there's questions about why they structured it that way, and I'll tell you why they structured it that way. For exactly what we're dealing with now. Their whole plan was for this fight with the U.S., Israel, and whoever else joins, if any. And that's been their sole purpose. They want to destroy the West. They say death to America and death to Israel. And they, over the years, if you paid attention to politics, that's their sole goal. Fund the proxy groups to attack the West. When they're able to, they will strike on their own, like that you see with them bombing the hell out of our Navy bases, our killing 13 service members. I hope there's no more, but 13 too many. But yeah, anyways, they clearly have a stockpile of their ballistic missiles or whatever you call them that they use. And we've grossly underestimated them, I think, and the president has. And I think he's bit off a little bit more than he thinks he could chew right now, in my opinion. But ultimately, it's just a sad situation with this war. And not only myself, but everyone who voted are disappointed in the outcome that Trump has got us in. And never would have got me to think that he would be in a war like this. His whole fundamental principle was to keep us out of these wars. But there was people in his ear that ultimately got to him, and the deep state chalked up another victory. My question is how we're going to get out of this in the fastest way possible without our economic situation becoming a catastrophe. And we're already seeing signs it may already be too late, to be honest, but that's just my opinion. But yeah, I want to know what you guys think. I want you guys to keep bringing me more information. We're not finished yet, but I just wanted to give my own opinion. And just the opposite, the lies that the government is telling you, including within the administration. There's too much evidence. All you got to do is look online. We're not doing well. Yes, we are hitting all these bases. We could do it day in and day out. We can overpower them in that sense. But just the total destruction of our bases that they are hiding, they're not showing the amount of damage we're taking with our satellites, our infrastructure, that they constantly, they keep going back to it over and over again, destroying just everything that's going to take us years to be able to get back, and more money we got to spend on rebuilding everything that they're destroying right now. But I'm not really an economist either, so I can't, I don't want to give you guys information I know nothing about. So we're just going to keep moving, and I got a little bit more I want to go here, and then we'll end it. But here we go. Let's see. Let me see here. All righty. As I continue analyzing Iran, as I said, it becomes even more clear to me that the system doesn't just rely on the power, it relies on the balance, tension, and calculated adaptation. And one of the most critical factors shaping its future is the eventual secession of Ali Khamenei. Because when that moment comes, which it has came, it won't be like a leadership transition. It'll be a potential inflection point to where multiple factions within the system of Iran, including the elements tied to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, could compete to shape the next phase of the Islamic Republic. And I see this as a moment where the internal balance of power could either consolidate further around hardliners or open limited space for more pragmatic influences. It's all depending on how unified the elite remains, and at the same time I can't ignore the economic dimensions, which I believe is one of the most significant long-term threats to the system's stability. As you know, the years of sanctions, mismanagement, and corruption, combined with the IRGC's dominance over key industries, they have created structural inefficiencies and widespread public frustration. And this economic pressure feeds directly into cycles of protests that continue to emerge across the country. And it's often driven by younger generations who feel disconnected from the revolutionary ideology of '79. And even over the time I see and I look at these protests, I see both, the challenges or the potential for limitations, I should say, because while they demonstrate real dissatisfaction and courage, they also reveal the challenges of sustaining, the momentum in the face of coordinated crackdowns by forces like Basha, that secret police, in my opinion, is what they are, which remains loyal to the regime and they're highly effective at controlling the unrest. And we've seen it where they just straight up kill you. And that stands out to me as the key missing piece in these movements. It is a unified leadership structure capable of coordinating action across regions and special groups, as well as the absence of a significant fracture within the security apparatus, which historically has been a decisive factor in the successful uprisings. And then elsewhere, and without that, a split in the system retains its ability to reassert control. But what makes this even more complex is the role of external pressure, because while international sanctions and geopolitical tensions are often indeed able to weaken the Iranian government, they can also have the unintended effects of strengthening and hardlining the hardliners in the country, and the narratives reinforcing the IRGC's position as a defender of the national sovereignty of the country. It's also undermining the reformist arguments for the engagement with the outside world and creating a paradox where external efforts to destabilize the regime may actually contribute to its fall. And at the same time, Iran's regional strategy built around alliances and influence networks feeds back into the domestic legitimacy among the certain factions, allowing the leadership to protect and strengthen the hardliners. It will further complicate the internal dynamics. And when I turn back to the traction, what? Okay. I see a system that is simultaneously stable and it can change, of course, and I believe the future of Iran will ultimately be determined not by a single event, but by the interaction of the forces over time. Whether economic conditions continue to deteriorate, whether outcomes that structure barriers that have historically limited its impact, because at the end of the day, the real contest isn't just between the government and the people, it's within the system itself, within the networks of power that sustain it, and within the calculations of those who control the forces and resources. And if those internal dynamics shift even slightly, the consequences could be profound, not just for Iran, but for the entire region. But until that shift happens, the system remains what it was designed to be: resilient, adaptive, and extraordinarily difficult to dismantle. As we bring this deep dive to a close, what becomes clear is that Iran is not defined by a single narrative, a single faction, or even a single direction. Instead, it is a nation shaped by layers of power, religious authority, military influence, and the potential for maneuvering in a population that is increasingly aware of its place within that system. What we're witnessing is not just tension, but a constant recalibration of control, where each faction is working to preserve its influence while responding to the pressures that continue to evolve both inside and outside the country. At the core of this system is a structure that was designed to endure. It was built after the revolution, hardened through the war, and tested by decades of sanctions and isolation. That kind of system doesn't fracture easily, but it does adapt, and the adaptation often reveals where real stress points lie, whether it's economic hardship, generational change, or shifting political alliances. Each pressure point adds weight to a system that must continuously adjust to survive. And then yet within the resilience there is undeniable cracks forming. A younger generation, more connected to the outside world than ever before, is beginning to question the long-standing norms and expectations. Their demands are not always unified and their methods are not always coordinated, but their presence is significant. They represent a force that cannot be easily controlled through traditional means, and over time that creates friction within a system that depends on stability and predictability. At the same time, the internal factions within Iran are not opening in isolation from one another. Hardliners, reformists, and pragmatic actors are constantly recalculating their positions. They're forming temporary alignments and competing for the influence in ways that are not always visible on the surface. These dynamics create a kind of internal crises that match where each move is calculated not just for immediate impact, but for the long-term positioning within the broader power structure. The role of powerful institutions, particularly those in military and economic influence, adds another layer of complexity to this equation. These organizations are not instrumental of policy, they are stakeholders in the system itself. Their interests are tied to the continuation of the current structure, which means any potential shift in the power is not just political but also economic and strategic, I should say. And that reality makes a large-scale change significantly more complicated when it might appear from the outside. Externally, the pressures on Iran continues to shape the internal dynamics in ways that are often misunderstood. The sanctions, geopolitical tensions, and the regional conflict don't just challenge the state, they can also reinforce certain factions within it. In many cases, external threats are used to justify the internal consolidation, strengthening the very elements of the outside forces that may be trying to weaken it. As a paradox that has played out repeatedly over the years, and one that continues to influence the trajectory of the country today. Regional influence plays a critical role in, Iran, which operates and how it is perceived. The country is not just managing its internal affairs, it's actively engaged in a broader strategic environment that extends across the Middle East. These external engagements are often directly to internal power structures, meaning the decisions made beyond Iran's borders have immediately and lasting impacts within them. It's a feedback loop that connects domestic stability with regional ambition. At the same time, the economic realities cannot be ignored, and the inflation, unemployment, and limited access to global markets create daily challenges for ordinary citizens. These pressures don't always translate directly into political change, but they do contribute to the growing sense of the dissatisfaction that can influence the public sentiment over time. Economic strain has a way of amplifying the existing tensions, making it a key factor in understanding where the country might be headed. And another critical element is the information, who controls it and how it is distributed, and if it's consumed. In today's world, information flows are harder to contain. The information flow is harder to contain, and the narratives are constantly being challenged. This creates a dynamic environment where the perception can shift rapidly and where public awareness can grow even tightly in the systems. That doesn't necessarily lead to immediate change, but it does alter the long-term landscape in meaningful ways. Lord have mercy, my stomach is hurting me. Leadership transitions and succession planning also loom as major variables in the future of Iran. Whenever a system relies heavily on centralized authority, the question of that comes next becomes increasingly important. Different factions may have very different visions for the future, and how those visions compete or align could play a decisive role in shaping the country's next chapter. It is also important to recognize that the change, if it comes, is unlikely to follow a straight line. It may be gradual, uneven, and at times contradictory. There may be moments of reform followed by periods of tightening control and shifts in the area that are offset by resistance to one another. That kind of non-linear progression is typical of complex systems, especially those deeply rooted in the power structures and especially in the Persian culture. For the Iranian people, the stakes are deeply personal. This is not just a political or geopolitical issue. It's about their daily life, opportunity, and their ability to shape their own future. And while large-scale change may seem distant, the cumulative effects of individuals and their actions and attitudes and pressures can gradually influence the direction of a country. It's a reminder that even in highly structured systems, people remain crucial variables. From a global perspective, what happens inside of Iran matters far beyond its borders. It affects the regional stability, international relations, and the balance of power in a highly sensitive part of the world. That's why understanding these internal dynamics is so important, and that's why I wanted you guys to hear about it. It's not just for analysts and policymakers, but for anyone trying to make sense of the broader geopolitical landscape. So as we step back and we look at the full picture, what we see is that the system's under pressure, but not yet at the breaking point. We see the competing forces, each with their own strengths and limitations, navigating the landscape that is constantly shifting. And we see a population that is increasingly aware, increasingly connected, and increasingly important to whatever comes next. This story is far from over. In fact, it is still unfolding in real time, shaped by the decisions and events and interactions that are happening every single day. The future of Iran will not be decided by one moment, one leader, or one movement, but by the ongoing interplay of all these factors combined. If you found this breakdown valuable and you want to stay informed as these developments continue to unfold, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps bring more in-depth analysis and unfiltered perspectives just like this to the forefront. I want to thank you once again for tuning in to another episode of the Unfiltered Political Lens Podcast. We appreciate you being here, and we'll see you in the next video. Peace.